Hey guys, welcome back to the Pastor to Pastor podcast. We are excited for another episode with you guys. And before we get into all the goods, my man Robert Pooley's back in the house.
Hey man.
So we're excited. We have great conversations leading into these podcasts. We're just coming off of such a good conversation about a blog that I wrote called The Pruning Process and the Pain in the Pruning. It's something, I don't know, you walked in and kind of resonated with you. So,
well, it's just one of those things. And I just keep remembering, like when I read that, I'd written mine, my blog post is up and you can read it on the site. But when I read yours, I went, oh man, because it's one thing to read it theoretically. It's another thing when you start putting faces to it and the idea of pruning that happens in the church.
Yeah.
And it's painful. Yep. I mean, even when it's a good pruning, it's painful. Yep. And there's probably a lot of pastors who are watching right now. You need to stick with us through this conversation because it's something that if you haven't gone through it, you will. Mm-hmm. But I would dare say that most everybody's gone through it.
If you've been there a week, you've probably gone through the pruning process.
Well, if you planted this week and you're watching.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, yeah. So the foundation for what we're talking about here is John 15, Jesus talks about, that the vines that are connected to me, when you bear much those that don't bear fruit are cut away. Mm-hmm. And those that do bear fruit, and I always stop there when I'm teaching this, and I'd say, what do you think it would be? If you haven't read it yet, if those that don't bear fruit are cut away, what do you think is going to happen to the branches that do bear fruit? And people that don't know it yet.
Go fertilize it.
It's going to grow. He's going to grow it. It's going to be great. And I say, no. It's cut back. It's pruned. He prunes so that it will produce more fruit. And when we look at this in a church context, my encouragement to pastors is, when we're dealing with the people in our churches and we're dealing with people in our church and even I even open with a question, it's like, oh, them too.
Yeah.
Which is like people that have left your church or they're leaving your church or you don't know it yet, but they're going to leave your church. And so I've kind of created two people groups in the blog, kind of subconsciously, but there's always people that need to leave our church.
Right.
Right. We'll call them the dead branches, not to be offensive, but it is what it is, right? Like, they weren't part of the vision. They weren't really connected. They didn't give to the vision. They didn't serve the vision. They weren't part of the vision. And those are dead branches. Now, for the record, when they leave your church, they're not going to hell. They're just going to another church. Right. So they're dead branches to your church, meaning they're not taking up space.
And they may be productive at some other church.
Right.
That has a vision
that fits what they're looking for. Right. So when we say they're dead branches, we're not saying they're useless. We're saying they're dead branches in your church. They're taking up space, but they're not producing anything. Right.
My first rock band in high school was called the Dead Branches.
Hey, the Dead Branches. Yeah. So you've got this people group, and when they leave, you're not shocked, and for the most part, you're not even really hurt. Maybe a little bit, because it always hurts when people leave, even the people that were problems, right? But for the most part, you're like, I saw that coming, and that makes sense, that they left. But then there's people that leave your church that when they left, you're going, what?
Yeah.
Like, and it rarely comes from them, right? It comes from someone else in the church, or they posted something, they post on Instagram, found a new church that we love or something like that. And a church that really preaches the Bible or whatever. And you're going, I mean, weren't they just leading a small group? Like, we just had dinner. It felt like 2 months ago. Maybe it was a year ago, but it felt like, we talked on the phone recently. I high-fived them in the hallway. What's going on? And when that happens, that is a painful process.
Yeah.
And I think as pastors, we're the only emotional response we know how to have to that is to throw those people into the dead branches category. And so we get frustrated and we get angry and we get bitter. And we're like, well, they're just dead branches, so they're dead to me. And we don't say hello to them in Target or whatever. It's like they become part of this category that they really weren't. they were fruitful in your church. Yeah. They were friends to you, and you are hurting. And the whole goal was to help pastors through the blog, the pain and the pruning process, is to help pastors recognize that we have to know, we have to recognize that what's happening in our church is it's not that people are leaving it, it's that God is pruning it.
Right.
And in the pruning, he's preparing it to grow, but he's got to pull some people, even leave producing, greenery producing people out of the way. And what we as pastors can't do is let that turn us bitter or anxious or frustrated or outright angry or sad or depressed.
So I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
In that kind of situation, and like I said, we've all been through that, but if you're going through that as a pastor and you're feeling bitter or anxious or frustrated, who is that anger being directed at?
Oh man, what is a great question. Initially, I think it's at them.
Yeah.
Because we're giving our life to these people.
Right.
You know, we give our life to the call, but the call is to people.
Right.
So therefore, we're giving our life to people. And oftentimes, either if they give us a reason, which sometimes they don't even give us that, and they're not necessarily entitled to, we're not entitled to get a reason necessarily. But even if we do get a reason, it doesn't change how it hurts. And so we're mad at them because we've been through life together. We've done this together. We built this together. I worked hard to serve your family, right? I married you and your wife or married your kids, or I was there when your kids were born, or maybe even both. Yeah. I mean, you've been doing this a long time, longer than I have. So in some situations, you may have dedicated the child that you married 20 years later.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing life together. You were part of this vision. We went on vacations together. We ate together. I said no to some people so I could say yes to you.
Yeah.
And then in a moment where I would have wanted you to say no to something else and say yes to me, you didn't.
Right.
You said yes to another church or another opportunity. And that's painful. It's hard.
So the initial thing is that you're the frustrations with them.
Yes.
At what point do you turn that inward?
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I think it goes through phases. So I think the first phase is, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
What did I do wrong? I wasn't a good enough path. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I preach too hard? Did I not show up? I should have, I even said it in the blog. I should have called them back. I should have left my vacation early whenever they needed me. And we create this long list of should haves.
Yeah, shouldn't have waited an hour to answer their text.
Right, exactly. And it's like we start creating this long list of should haves, and I should have done things differently. If I was a better leader, they'd still be here. And if they were still here, we would still have the momentum we would have. And if we still have the momentum we would still be growing as a church. Right. And what we slowly start to realize, if we'll let ourselves realize it, is we start to think that person is a monumental part of what we've built. And I think that's the next phase of it. So the initial phase is, I should have done better, or maybe I could have done something different. But I think that ultimately leads us to start thinking that if this person is leaving, probably a lot of people are leaving, or a lot of people feel the same way they felt, or a lot of people are frustrated. If they're frustrated, more people are frustrated, more people are angry, more people are leaving. And if that's the case, everything that I've built, I'm using air quotes for those that are only listening to us, everything I've built is going to fall apart. Right. And this is an indication of something that's worse that's happening, when in reality, God might just be pruning. Like, their time is up here, and God's cutting the church back, and there's some of the branches that got cut off.
It's always hard, but it's definitely harder if they leave ugly.
Yes.
Right? So I've got a question. I know it's going to take us just a little bit off track, but I promise we'll come back.
Yeah.
But what would you say to a pastor that would say, hey, I really need to know how to teach my people to leave well? How do you leave well? How do I teach them to leave well? Maybe they're at a place where there's a difference in the vision, or they feel like there's a program that you're not offering that their kids are wanting to be involved with, whatever. It's always something.
So I want to be fair to our congregations in my answer here.
Okay.
I think we have to take a true, genuine self-assessment on whether or not we've cultivated an atmosphere where people can leave well.
Come on.
As pastors, have we historically cultivated an environment where people can leave well, where they do all of the right things? So they, they call and they set up a meeting and they explain to us that it's not you, it's not your vision. We just firmly believe God wants us to be somewhere else, and we're going to do that for us and our family and for our future. When they do that and you still treat your church like it's a gang and they're trying to get out of it, and now they're joining a rival gang, and so now you're going to have beef with them in the streets or whatever, So I think the first thing we have to do, and I'm talking to myself as much as I am anyone else, is I think we do have to ask the question: have we cultivated an environment where people can leave our church well? Mm-hmm. If they can't, or if the last 10 people that have left have end up being diseased people, metaphorically, where they've got some, they're unclean now and the rest of our church can't talk to them or whatever. Right. If we have cultivated that environment, I think that it is very unfair to expect people to subject themselves to abuse just so that you can have some sort of closure as a leader. Having said that, if you are gracious and compassionate and you do cultivate an environment where people can leave well, what would it look like for a person to leave well? I think the first thing we want is, as a pastor, I want to be part of the prayer process for you and your family. Hey, we're feeling something and we don't even know what it is yet, because we all know what it feels like for God to be closing a door. Right. And as soon as you start feeling that door is getting closed, I think bring your pastor into that process. Hey, we're feeling something. And we think it is a shift, and we think it may lead to a departure, and we want you praying with us about this. Right. And as pastors, we have to not try to quote unquote pray them out of the will of God.
We try to talk them
out of it, but truly say, I want to pray with you about that, and I want you to be where God wants you to be, and be okay with that answer. Right. So I would love, ideally, we're part of the early praying process. And then what I kind of tell people, what I try to tell people in our church is that I want to be part of the planting process. So where are you going to put roots down? I want to call that pastor, and I want to tell them, you're phenomenal. Here are their gifts. Here are some things about them, not negatives. Right. Here's some things I've been protecting them from that maybe you can help protect them from, whether it's they tend to overextend themselves in serving or something like that. Not they're terrible people and they gossip, not that kind of thing, but they say yes sometimes more than they should, and maybe look out for them. I want to be part of you getting planted in the next place and vouching for you to that pastor and honoring you as you go, and even calling some friends that we've all sat at the table with in the years past and having another dinner to honor you and honor your family and pray over them and do those things. And I think that is, so if we can pray with them in the inception process, if you will, and then join them in the planning process of wherever they're going to be ending up as we continue to pray. I think that's what it looks like to honor a family as they go.
And we've tried to do a lot of those things in our church for people who involve us in the process. But I can probably count,
one or two hands.
The number of people that actually have left well like that. Yeah. More, it's like, well, I haven't seen them and they were normally always here. Yeah. Or what's going on. And so you finally call them and that sort of thing. And they go, well, we've been going to such and such church. And it's like, we've been there. Yeah. Just like you were saying, we've gone through all this history together. We've done a lot of life together. Yeah. And now we're hurting. I mean, I'm hurting. Yeah. Because my friends, I thought were my friends, didn't even say goodbye. Right. It's like having a dinner at your house and you get up and go to the bathroom, you come back and your guests are all gone.
Everyone left.
What happened?
What happened?
Yeah,
we're not here.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Yeah. And for a pastor, the brutal self-assessments that you go through, it hurts. It takes. I feel like it takes years off your life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are, and it keeps us up at night, right? We can't sleep. We're not sleeping. We're thinking, what did I do? How could I have done that different? And how could I fix the problem? And then again, for me, it's like, who else is? Maybe there's another is there something deeper going on? We really start to run through the mill.
Well, and because you're trying to figure it all out. You're trying to get a assessment of it in your head because nobody's talked to you. Yeah, they just left. And then you start going through even the deeper thing of, well, these people, they carry a lot of influence.
Yeah, good or bad.
So who else is going to leave?
Right, exactly.
What else is going to happen from this?
Yes.
And you start, I mean, it just throws you into this panic. And if you're not careful, you can just start spiraling in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, it is quite a whirlwind of emotions that you get caught up in it as that process goes. You know, I think my question for you in that is, have you ever had someone that did leave in an unhealthy way come back and give you any sort of feedback as to why they, like, maybe an apology? Hey, you know, I didn't do that well. This is why I did it the way I did it. You know, not justifying it, but just kind of giving you space. Has that ever happened for you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's always very appreciated when it does, because it kind of puts a little bit of salve on a wound that's still down there a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
But I've had people come up and say, hey, you know, we were at your church, we were going through a lot, you know, we felt this, we felt that, and we weren't sure, and it really had nothing to do with you. Of course, you always think it's about you.
Right, of course.
You know, but it had nothing to do with you. It had nothing to do with the church. It was just the place that we were in at that point.
Yeah.
And we were needing to kind of step out and do something different.
Yeah.
And that helped us. But we wanted to call back. I had a pastor friend of mine who texted me yesterday, and he got a text from somebody who he had a split with many years ago.
Wow.
And they texted him back and said, I just want to write you and thank you and tell you, you really put a lot into my life. Mm-hmm. And I immediately texted my pastor friend back and said, are they dying? Are they trying to make some sort of...
Yeah, what a rarity. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's just so, you know,
it's
unusual.
Yeah.
But it's so beautiful when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I'm with you on that. And that's why I think, you know, we have to learn how to help people leave well. But we just have to recognize, unfortunately, we're not going to get that opportunity sometimes.
Right, and they're going to leave. And some of them are going to leave ugly, and some of them are going to leave carrying a lot of influence, and people are going to go, well, you know, if the whoever family is leaving, there must be something wrong.
Right, exactly.
And then that starts kind of a chatter under the things. Well, if there's something wrong, what's going on? What are we not hearing?
What do I need to know?
Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then that starts, have you heard anything? No. What have you heard? Well, I just know that so-and-so is leaving, and it gets that gossip thing all of a sudden just jumps out.
Yeah.
And those are all fires that every single pastor I know deals with.
Yep.
And it's amazing how many calls we get at pastor to pastor, and many people that I've sat to and walked through this very scenario.
Yeah.
We've just had 7 families from our church just leave.
Because it's never one.
No,
it's when it rains, it pours type thing. You know, it's like it's like a wave.
If it is one, it's a family that is leaving well.
Yeah, you're right.
It's usually a family that's leaving well.
Yeah.
Or they haven't been there long enough to get influence.
Yeah, no, it's true.
You know,
no, it usually is in waves. Well, you know, and I think too, it's like even people that may not leave well, but people, you know, there's the dead branches departure. You know, which I think leave in droves because of the influence that people cultivate. But I've noticed that even when God prunes the church, even oftentimes that still is in kind of waves. You know, it's rarely 1 or 2 families at a time. It feels like it's 5 or 6, which I think is why we're tempted to put the pruning, you know, the cutting back. The pruning is the cutting back, and the cutting off in the same bucket, because it looks the same and it feels the same, but it's not the same. As pastors, we have to know the difference. You know, going with what you're talking about, I remember John Maxwell. I was at a conference with him with my staff. At this point, my staff was 5 people. And I remember him saying, he was talking about a similar conversation. He said, I remember taking over my first church and building my first staff. Yeah. And I just knew we were going to be together forever. This is my team right here. We're going to do it. He said 2 years later, I was the only one left. Right. and I sat out there thinking naively, but that won't happen to me. I'm looking at the people next to me. No, these people they're going to be with me forever. I got 2 of them left out of the 5, you know, and it's like, because it just happens. And that is the nature of it. So then what we have to do is we have to see we as pastors have to learn, all right, so what is the difference between cutting off dead branches and pruning or cutting back good branches? And because, like we were talking about earlier, they look a lot alike. Mm-hmm. It feels the same as a pastor. If you're not looking at it from God's perspective, it feels the same. And because it feels the same and it looks the same, I think we respond to pruning emotionally, even verbally, even in regards like words like hostility and stuff like that. We respond to the pruned branches the same way we respond to the dead branches. And that is what we as pastors have to realize, is that the pruning process is a necessary benefit to your church, but it still hurts.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this as you were talking about it. I remember hearing Rick Warren talk about roses. It's something that he has. That's one of his side hobbies. Okay. Is that he loves to grow roses, and his roses are beautiful. And people that have seen his house go, who does all this? He goes, I do. Wow. I'm doing these. It's my thing. It's the thing that I do where I can get out and think and do all that stuff. And he said, well, how did you do this? He says, you have to ruthlessly prune. And he said, most people can't do it because they go up to their rose bush and they see these beautiful roses, and the proper way is you have to cut off some of those actual beautiful roses. Yep. So that they will grow more. Yep. And you go, yeah, but they're so beautiful. I don't want to cut them. Yeah. But you have to because it's the bigger picture. And I think sometimes we lose sight in the moment of the bigger picture. There's a much bigger picture that's developing here. God is doing something that's most likely going to outlive us.
It should.
Hopefully it's going to outlive us, and the legacy of it's just going to keep going and going and getting more fruit and touching more lives. Mm-hmm. But that process, as brutal as it feels in the moment, because say it the way you said it in the blog.
We say you can get cut. There will be cut off. Right. And in some seasons you'll be cut back. Mm-hmm. But no matter what, you're getting cut.
You're going to get cut.
You're getting cut.
And I think that's so apropos. I think you have to really look at that and go, hey, I realize this is God's doing something. Yep. He's pruning, all of that. If you can kind of even get your eye on the bigger picture, he's going to do something really great here. He's preparing us for this next stage. He's going to bring people in with new giftings and things that's going to propel things that we weren't seeing. We know that intrinsically. It's still
getting cut.
Stings.
Still got to bleed.
You're still bleeding.
You're still bleeding. Yeah. No. And that's the pain in it. And I think that's why if we're not careful as pastors, we respond to it incorrectly. It's because, again, it feels like dead branch cut off. It feels like nasty departure, and a lot of times it's not. And so, but either way, you're getting cut. And so now, how do you deal with that? Well, what's the correct perspective that we have to have as pastors when we're seeing good branches, fruit producing branches, greenery, not dead branches, not withered branches. When we see good, green producing, fruitful branches being cut off from our church, how do we respond to that?
I think we've got to have a heart of gratitude. We've got to, first of all, say, God, thank you for the years that they served faithfully here and the things. Don't focus on any of the bad stuff. Focus on the good stuff. What did they do? Man, they were there. They were there for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't always just me being there for them. They were there for me, or they encouraged me, or that they bought me that $25 Chick-fil-A card, or whatever, just as an encouragement, or and you go, they were there. They're good people. They're going to be a blessing somewhere. Mm-hmm. God is probably taking them in like a puzzle piece and got a new puzzle to put them into that's going to be great and it's going to be fantastic. Mm-hmm. And he's not saying, I'm going to do that to your detriment. Yeah. He's saying, I'm going to do that for the ability that they can bring into this new place. Right. And I'm going to find you someone who fits as well, but can actually take you to a next level because you're working towards that new thing that I'm doing.
Right. Well, and especially, I was And during this whole thing, I've been doing a teaching on this for a while now, talking about the pruning. And I remember bringing this up to Dr. Henry Cloud. Okay. And it was a Zoom call type deal. And I remember bringing this up to him.
But you weren't sitting at dinner with him.
Yeah, no, I wasn't hanging out with Dr. Henry Cloud.
That's less cool.
It felt very pretentious there for a second. I remember bringing it up, and his response was, yeah, because you know how long it takes for fruit branches to become dead branches, don't you? I said, no. He said, 1 season.
Wow.
And so when you're talking about God taking these fruit-producing branches and putting them into a new tree, they're fruit-producing now, but if they stay too long in the environment where they can't produce fruit, it only takes a very brief season for them to go from amazing friends, great encouragers, all this long list of small group leaders, serve on your teams, all those things, to not only doing nothing, but maybe even becoming a cancer to the people in your church. Right. All it takes is 1 season, and a season can mean anything, right? It can be 3 months or a year, but 1 season is all it takes for a fruit-producing branch to become a dead branch. So we have to be careful to think that God should have just left him here. He moved them over there, and they're still producing great fruit for them, and why can't they be producing good fruit for us? Well, because if he would have stayed here, they were only 1 season away from not producing any fruit at all. And I think that is the thing we have to remember is, anything for too long can become a bad thing, even if it's a good thing, right? So it's just keeping that in mind. And so understanding and remembering that is super important. So knowing that God is going to move them into a season where they're going to be good fruit, they're going to be good fruit-producing branches, someone else's church, and God needs to make that move for them.
Yeah.
And it's necessary.
So I'm sure that there's a pastor right now who's going to be watching this. It may be a year later, but they're going to be watching this podcast, and they're dealing with this situation. They're going through it right now. Mm-hmm. They're hurting, they're angry, they're going through all the phases. Yeah, right. I mean, there's the frustration, the anger, the all of it, and the grief,
bitterness,
grieving.
That's a huge one. I think we underestimate.
Yeah,
we do not create space to grieve the people, to grieve those losses well. So yeah, I totally agree. Go ahead and carry on.
We don't. Is it that we don't create the space, or we don't want to give them that?
Yeah,
what I'm saying. We're mad. We don't want to grieve. I'm not going to grieve you because I'm mad at you.
Yeah, you useless. No,
there's hurt that's attached to that. But once you get past that hurt, then the grieving part,
of course,
begins to come on, and you start to go, "Gosh, I miss them. I miss my friends," and that sort of thing. We live in a beach community. Where I live is a beach community. It's a smaller community. And if somebody comes to your church, well, there's a good chance they've been at other churches, right. Or they've been at your church, now they're at some other church, and so you're going to see people all the time. Yep. You're going to run into them at Walmart and that sort of thing. I've told you the story about the couple that I ran into.
Absolutely.
And there's I see them all the time, and the big thing for me is I just want to go and greet them and love on them. Mm-hmm. And, really just try to pour into them. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading your blog, and I was kind of, like I said, it becomes very personal because you read that blog, you immediately start seeing faces and you remember conversations and you think about the good, the bad, and the ugly aspect of it. And I remember thinking about, people that have left but didn't get replanted. Mm-hmm. They just wound up continuing to be dead branches. And it seems like that's almost a bigger percentage than the one who leaves well and ends up. There's so many that leave, and we can all think of people like that. Sure. They go like, "Where are you going to church now?" "Oh, we've not really been going."
Yeah. Well, and I think that, for those branches, what we have to remember, I think, is the context that John 15 is actually written in.
Yeah.
And if someone leaves our church and they become actual dead spiritual branches, the issue was never our church or our preaching. It was their connection to God to start with. So now we're it's not that if Jesus wasn't good enough for him, how in the world could we have been good enough for him? I think is where my mind goes when those types of things happen. And the hard part is not letting your heart become so hardened that when the prodigal comes home, you don't become the older brother from the Bible, but you become Christ as a representative of what the older brother should be. Luke 15 for the I think that's a big deal. One of the things you said earlier that I was just going to touch on, and then you had a question you were getting at as far as there's a pastor listening. But one thing I wanted to mention when we talk about grief, when we talk about grieving departures, and I remember listening to a speaker, and I can't for the life of me remember who it was, but it really resonated deeply. It was right after my son Jabin had passed away and went to be with the Lord. And I was doing a study on the psychology of the grief box, which we've talked about before. Yeah. And you can look up the grief box if you want. I was just doing a study on the psychology of it, and I had lost my son, and we were processing grief, and my wife processes grief in a very strange way. Very delayed, very isolated. So her grief processing is just unique. So I was really trying to learn, how can I lead my wife through grief, being that she processes it so differently than most people. And I remember hearing this phrase from someone that said, you only grieve things that mattered to you. And when you grieve something, it's a great opportunity to realize the magnitude and the honor it is for something or someone to hold that kind of space in your heart.
Wow.
And I remember just leaning back going, wow. That some people don't grieve because they don't know what it feels like to be so grateful or have such a relationship in their life that means that much to them. And so if you are grieving, it's okay to grieve, be okay processing with grief and loss and being sad, not to the point of depression or darkness, but just be okay being sad that you've lost something, because that just means it mattered. And I think for us, it's like, to properly grieve someone's departure in a healthy way lets us go, man, that family really did mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
And I'm glad for those that make it, do it, I'm glad they are somewhere where they're being fed, but man, it hurts. And being able to have that conversation in a healthy way, and process it.
And I think that's something that those that are listening need to understand, is because we are pastors, We've experienced this. It's not that we're talking theoretically. These are things.
Give you some names right now.
These are things that we've gone through, and these are things that we will continue to go through. That's a part of
every pastor.
It's a part of life.
Yeah.
And but I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking about a particular family. I can see them in my mind. And of course I'm still friends with them on social media, so I see their life and all of that sort of thing. And I think, I think I really grieved them, but it seems like they just moved on.
Sure.
And I realized I held a different view of our relationship than what they were holding.
Yeah.
And that messed with my head a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just something that you look at and you go, wow, that's why and even to this day, there's still some grief there.
Yeah.
Because you look at it and go, I thought, we watched our kids grow up, and I thought we were going to be friends forever. I thought, man, when I go to heaven, and it's just going to be like the continuation of just what we did for church for long. And all of a sudden they're not there.
Yeah.
And you go, wow. Right.
I'm with you on that. And I think to some degree, I think it's interesting how those relationships can ebb and flow through different seasons, where, no relationship with the people in our church is stagnant. It's always moving. And so at one point, those same people, I'm using this with you as a pinpoint for this analogy, but at one point, had you cut it off, it would have been detrimental to them, and survivable for you, But we now moving into us. We are on the receiving side. Receiving side often ends of them being content without us, but us not knowing yet how to be content without them.
Well, I mean, I definitely survive it.
Oh, sure,
Move on.
We're not in a cave of depression.
No,
here.
no,
We're
no.
just,
Right.
Yeah, we are. You know, I think people process. If people know they're going to break something off, they process the departure of it.
Yeah, long before
and
we're aware of
the
it.
premeditated part of it. Yeah,
But it catches us off guard,
right? So they've dealt with the grief, which I think, again, talking with others about this, I think that the distance that they create between the two of us oftentimes is them grieving it. We just don't know what it is yet because it hasn't been revealed to us.
Yeah. I think it's just that disconnect of these people were an integral part of my life and now they're not.
Of course.
And then you're having to kind of deal with that. And I think, with pastors, you go through this a lot. You go through this pain a lot over and over and over again. And after a while, you have these hurts that are accumulating inside of you, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, this is not even talking about pain that you go through when you're walking through and stepping into other people's pain to help them work
This
through
is your
stuff.
pain.
This is just your pain that you're dealing with from your interactions with other people.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff starts building up inside of you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonder that most pastors never quit.
Right. Right. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. No, the truth is pastors are quitting all the time.
Right.
And it's because just the emotional toll of this sort of thing, it gets too much. And there's probably somebody that's watching now, and I keep coming back to this idea, there's somebody that's watching now that is feeling that emotional toll, and they've gone through the introspection and they've gone through the thing and they said, it's me. Well, it's not me, it's them. Or maybe people just don't like me, or maybe I'm just not called for this, or maybe I thought I was. And that's always a possibility that maybe they weren't called. But what would you say to a pastor who says, man, I'm just in the midst of this and I just don't know if I want to do it anymore. I don't know if I can go on with all that kind of pain. I'd rather, help somebody get their Slurpee at the 7-Eleven,
Well, my first response to that would be, if you're called to be a pastor, you walk in a grace. I in situations like this, I hate using Christian cliches, but I'm going to have to use one, where his strength is made perfect in our weakness.
Listen,
where you're walking in a grace that is not your own, and a strength that is not your own, to persevere through losses that would shatter most people. We are called to navigate the life of a pastor, and God is not shocked by our suffering and painful points of leadership. Therefore, he can strengthen us to endure. And we don't just need grace to be saved. We need grace to sustain. And that sustaining grace is what keeps us going first. The second thing I would tell you is to look around, because you have some relationships that are around you that are still worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And yes, that one or those two or whatever. And as years go on, you get more, but some of them hurt less. Or but the one or two or three that you're currently, I would say the wound is still fresh. Look around, because you probably have some people around you that are still worth fighting for, that are still worth leading, that are still, and it's not to say that others aren't worth it, but they're gone now. And so you're having to process that. But you have some people that if you quit today, those people, those relationships, you need those relationships, and those relationships need you. And so, and there's fruit, you're still producing fruit. And so we have to come back to, what are the good things that God is doing in my church? Yeah, these are painful things happening in ministry. These are painful things happening in my life. But, you're baptizing people. People are getting free in your small groups. They're serving on your teams and finding purpose they never had. And so we have to keep coming back to, man, what are the things God is doing? We're always going to be able to find those painful things, or those things are going to find us. But the first thing I think is man, look at what God's doing around you. And maybe let's get our eyes off of the wounds, because those things can become so
Well, that's right, because we tend to move towards what we're looking at.
Right? Yeah, it's great. Great phrase.
I mean, if you're driving down the road and you look over something in your car, next thing you know, you start veering off that way.
Yeah.
So you move towards what you're looking at. So if you're always looking at the pain and the moves and all of that, you've got to look forward to the fruit. You've got to look forward to the vision. Don't lose sight of the vision. God's given you this great big vision, and you've got to keep going for the vision. So you got to keep your eye on that. Let that drive you. Let that propel you, and all of that. But you've got to be careful to guard your heart at the same time. And by guarding your heart, I don't mean closing it off.
Yeah.
I mean just being careful what you allow in your thought process, because here's what happens is sometimes we call it guarding our heart, and what we do is we reach a point where we say, well, I'm just not going to let anybody in. I'm just going to keep everybody at arm's length, and I'm not going to. I mean, they used to teach this in seminary.
Yeah.
You can't be friends with people in your church. You can't have friends in your church. Don't do that. It's the worst possible thing that you could do. And there was generations of church leaders that grew up believing that.
That's right.
Well, that's crock.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Yeah.
You can have friends. You can build friends. And yes, you have some times where friendships go awry.
Absolutely.
But you know what? I've gone into a restaurant and had a bad meal, and I didn't quit eating.
That's right.
Absolutely. You just got to keep trying and keep building relationship. And who knows? I tell people on Sundays, hey, your next best friend may be walking in the door this week. It's the same for pastors.
Yeah.
Your next most productive person, your next most, the person that's inspiring to you, this next person that's going to help take your vision and help you run with it. They may be walking in your church this coming Sunday. And so you've got to always, you guard your heart, but you guard it to the idea that God's got me. There's a vision. He is going to sustain me. His strength is going to be made perfect in my weakness.
Yeah.
I'm going to be all right.
Yep. And that brings us to the reality is, again, we go back to John 15, the branches that produce fruit, he cuts back, he prunes. But the last part of that is so that it will produce much more fruit.
Right.
And, you said his name earlier, and I forgot it already, about the seats in the bus. And the analogy we were talking about earlier.
Collins.
Jim Collins says
good to great.
He says that for every person that is taking up a seat on the bus, there's 3 other people that have the same giftings with a higher capacity that are waiting to sit in that seat. And as long as someone's sitting there, they won't sit down. Right. And sometimes God has to cut back the branches or prune these good branches, and he's going to put them in another house so that house can grow more fruit. But God's not short on branches to graft into your house either.
Right.
And so, if the person that left, had deep relational equity for you, that, you went to dinner often, God's going to sit someone in that seat that has deeper relational equity for you. If that person that left, it was just super generous. And every time, it's like, man, we need new microphones. They cut the check. Well, you know what? We're believing that God's going to put the person in building that can write a check for a new building, for God's sake. Like, he has that capacity. Now, that's not the promise we have from him, that he's always just going to set people in our lap like that. But what I'm saying is, if we never let the seat get empty, how does God put anybody in it with a higher capacity? So if we need better leaders, sometimes the leaders that are there have to get moved out. And sometimes God doesn't just move them out of that spot. He moves them out the whole bus or moves them out of the house. And so I think the other side of that is growth. God's goal in doing this is that we would grow, that we would see increase, that we would see more fruit. And sometimes God is going to move even fruit, not just dead branches. Sometimes he's going to move fruitful people out of the bush or the house or the church and prune it back, because he's preparing to let even more growth happen in the area that it had happened before. And I've said this earlier, I think a lot of times what we end up realizing, if we'll take a step back, take a deep breath, realize we don't own people, right? Go through the whole thing, help them leave well. If we'll take a step back, a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, if you'll take a true assessment of those people, you'll find out they detached from the vision a year ago. Mm-hmm. Their giving went down. That's not what everything rises and falls on, but it is a metric. Their giving went down. Their small group participation went down. How much they served went down. How many new people they were bringing to church on a consistent basis started going down. And what was happening? Well, if you will take a true, genuine assessment, a non-biased assessment, you'll realize God's been actually preparing them and us for this for a year. I just didn't want to see it. And to me, that is always helpful to take a step back and go, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I can see it now. God was doing it the whole time. It's like the old Matt Chandler thing. Like, I knew he had it, I knew God was doing something, but to truly do that and let that be a true assessment of what God's doing in your church. And then it is a lot easier to go, maybe this wasn't as out of the blue as I thought it was. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. You're still getting cut. All the things we talked about. It's just I think it helps us process a little bit. And then again, we're praying, all right, God, if you took that person with a high capacity for giving, or if you took that person that was just an absolute rock star greeter or the worship leader, if you prune them out of the house, then I'm going straight into prayer mode about whoever you've got to sit in that seat, because I know you got someone to sit in that seat. And so I'm praying for them right now. And man, I know for me, and you've been doing this quite a while, he never fails to put someone in that seat and you go, this person's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, what
was I worried about?
9 times out of 10, I would say 99 times out of 100, you're going, this person's way better than the person that was in this seat.
So why was I laying awake at night? Why was I doing that?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely true. I think you've really kind of hit on it, is if you're a pastor and you're going through this, there has to be, I call it ruthless trust. You just have to be ruthless about trusting God and saying, no matter what it looks like. I mean, we walk by faith and not by sight. So when you see people leaving, your sight tends to say, it's going south. We're going down.
The ship is sinking.
Somebody throw me a life preserver. And it's not that. The ship's not sinking. God's making some shifts, and almost every time God makes the shift, if we will cooperate with him, it gets better.
That's right.
It gets better.
And with that analogy, what if someone else's ship is sinking?
Yeah.
And the 4 families God just pulled out of your church and planted into theirs is what's going to bring the boat back right.
Yeah.
And God's still going to bring the right people to be on yours, right? Yeah. They didn't get off of a sinking ship. They stepped off of a ship you built and is doing well to go help another sinking ship under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. And God's going to put someone in your ship to continue to help you captain it and lead it. And so, we never know what God's doing with those branches. We know if they're producing fruit, he's going to continue to let them produce fruit somewhere else. And so it's being content with that. I love what Greg Surratt said when I interviewed him for our podcast. It stuck with me. And he said, pastors have to have thick skins and soft hearts.
Yeah.
And thick skin and soft heart. And I said, that's it.
I've told pastors for the longest time, when they go, how did you do it? How did you stay in ministry all of these years? And it's, you got to have alligator skin, it's got to be just about impenetrable, that sort of thing. But you can't let it harden your heart. Mm-hmm. You harden your heart and it's gone. It's over.
Well, yeah, because that's, thick skin is one, again, the dead branch departure doesn't hurt most of the time. Maybe a little bit, but it's like it's kind of like the crocodile getting hit with something. Yeah, I felt it, but whatever. I think the reason why these hurt is it starts on the inside. It's like an infection, not an external wound. It's something that gets into our heart and it starts to breed problems there, and then it eats its way out. And I think that's why our tough, thick skin doesn't do as well blocking it, because it kind of works from the inside out. It works inside our mind, inside our heart, and then it starts to manifest,
I think that's why we have to be led by the Holy Spirit when those moments come up. Because if we're doing it in our head, our soulish thinking and that sort of thing, we're going to be thinking everything is this or this is that. Or we're going to be pondering worst case scenarios, and it's going to be this and it's going to be that, and we're going to be in a panic mode. But if we're walking with the Holy Spirit, we know, hey, I've got you. It's going to be okay. And you can just say, God, I trust you in this. I don't see it all right yet, but I know you're going to show me. I know you're going to direct me. And how do I know that? Because you've done it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I'll say this as we wrap up. I had a fruit-producing branch in my church leave. I took over the church, and he left probably 2 months, maybe 3 months later. I'm talking stayed at my house, like we were he was on our worship team. We were close, and he wouldn't mind me using his. Well, he wouldn't mind me using him. His name's Ryan, and I mean we were boys. Like as close as you can get without bleeding the same blood. Like we were that close, and in our friend circle and stuff, and in his own hurt, left, and fruit producing branch left in a bad way. Now I can see God. It was a pruning. God was able to do some things in his absence that God probably would not have done in his presence. But one thing, the reason I'm getting at, one thing is it probably took me about a year to let the Holy Spirit do a healing on that wound. And I wish he had done it sooner, because once God started doing that healing on my wound, one of the things I started telling my people in my church, especially the people that he was friends with, that had gotten bitter, and we had gotten offended, and all of us were frustrated, and we didn't want to talk to him at Target, that kind of thing. Sure. And one thing I started telling them was, you need to start getting your heart ready for his return. Yeah. Because if it happens and he shows back up, he's going to need compassionate hearts to receive him. Yeah. And if it never happens, then we got healed in the process. And I think for pastors that are out there that you have dealt with that, and you've allowed the wound to become an infection of bitterness in your own heart, is you never know when God's actually going to use you to heal the people that hurt you, which is what happened with Ryan and I. He found himself in a bad place and emotionally, which led to him in a bad place spiritually, and God actually put it on my heart to go rescue him and bring him back to the church and back into the fold. And we did all of that together, but it started with the willingness to not only be healed, but then to pray, God, give me the type of heart that would welcome him back when he showed up. And I'm not going to lie to you, it was hard, because I'm a very prideful person. So it was hard for me. But I can tell you now, he doesn't live here now, he lives in Nashville. But if I called him tomorrow and said, I need you, he would be knocking on my door, and however long it takes to drive from Nashville to Pensacola. But that relationship not only got restored, but got richer because of restoration. Right. And so I say that to all the pastors out there, that you are grieving the dead branches, and you are grieving the pruning, and you are grieving the process, and you've even unintentionally let that infection get into other people, and that happens. Start praying about and leading your people to a place of healing, because God is going to heal you to either just for the sake of healing you, so that you know how to deal with other people better, or maybe even healing you to bring that person back into your life at some point. And either way, you need to have done that. But I'll tell you, whether it's dead branches or good branches, you're going to get cut.
So for pastors that are going through this, could you just pray over them before we close out?
Yeah, for sure. So, Father, we just, first and foremost, God, we're still grateful for the calling on our lives. I think I speak on behalf of a number of pastors. We went to seminary, we got our pamphlets, we did our books, we got our degrees, and I can raise my hand with a number of people that say nothing prepared us for this. And so, God, in the weakness of our lives, of our leadership, of our pastoring, God, we're so grateful that we don't have to go at it alone. And Holy Spirit, you carry us. And for the pastor that is out there listening or watching right now, whose grieving heart is bleeding, whose spirit is heavy due to relational loss, who's experienced not only dead branches being cut off that they honestly maybe weren't as frustrated with, but the good branches being pruned that just led them into a darkness. God, I pray that you reveal to them that you are working. It's not that people are leaving. It's not that terrible things are happening. Yes, there may be some things to tweak and make better, but at the end of the day, God, you do the pruning. But also that means you're in charge of the growing. So God, I pray that you give us peace and joy, even in the pruning process, that we can help people leave well, and our hearts can be prepared to receive new people into those seats. And so God, for the pastor that's hurting, put a ointment that can only come from the Holy Spirit, that can help us continue to lead even while we bleed, to have a confidence that we can trust in you, that we're not building this thing on our own because we're not building it for us anyway. So touch our hearts and touch our minds, that we would know we can surrender completely to you. You will build your church. You've never needed our help nor our permission. But thank you where you have our help, and continue to lead us in that. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, this coming week, we're going to be spending a week with a group of pastors. It's one of the things that Pastor to Pastor does.
We are.
Can you talk a little bit about just what that is, what we do, why we do it?
Absolutely.
How much does it cost?
Yeah, so it's a great question. As we wrap up, we offer cohort packages for pastors. And so this week we will be in Charleston, South Carolina. And so
on the beach.
And so it's an exciting time. I think there's going to be about 17 of us roughly, spending 4 days together, laughing, eating, maybe a little bit of crying, but some extracurricular activities, just taking guilt-free naps, just all the good stuff. And man, recharging our spirits and being encouraged by one another. It's going to be a powerful time. And we can actually help pastors get connected to those.
Their wives as well.
So we have cohort packages that we can help sit with you and even your board if we need to. And we can actually show you how the national missions budget of your church can help fund other pastors to get into cohorts. And by helping other pastors, it also actually helps you. So we can get you on a cohort retreat once a year with the same group of pastors. So you're cultivating deep relationships. Your wife on a retreat in Destin, Florida at a massive beach house for 4 days with other pastors' wives, the same ones every year, so that they're building deeper connections, which, come on, your wife needs that, right? And so we'll get you on a cohort retreat, get your wife on a cohort retreat, and get you coaching throughout the year as we continue to drop content and help you through whatever it is that you're going through. All that $3,900 for the year, that covers yours and your wife's. And so we've had a number of very generous business leaders and donors help create opportunities to get that cost low. And so $3,900 for a year out of your national missions budget gets you a retreat, your wife a retreat, and it also helps fund pastors around the country getting healed and make sure that we can finish strong.
I think that's powerful. I just want to encourage you. Take a look at that. And if you need somebody to talk to your board, give us a call. If you need help, if you're hurting, if you just need somebody to pray for you and encourage you, get in touch with us. And our website is pastortopastor.life. pastortopastor.life. You can find all kinds of resources there. And we're just saying, reach out. Don't try to do this alone. Don't hurt by yourself. Let us walk you through it.
Absolutely. And we're so grateful for Robert and so grateful for you guys. Make sure you subscribe, share, do all the things, follow us, and connect with us on social media and every platform we're available for podcasts and with YouTube. And we'll be ready to drop some more content coming up soon for the Pastor to Pastor podcast. Thank you guys. We'll see you next time.